Welcome to Confessions of a Cyberpsychologist. I am Carolyn Freeman, and today I am chatting with Dr. Meagan Copelin about the re-victimisation of older adults in online scams. Meagan is a speaker, a contributing author and blogger, a mental coach, and is also the founder of Mental Rich, a healthcare intelligence company. Welcome, Meagan. I'm so delighted to have you on board.
Me too. I'm excited too. Thank you for having me today.
Meagan, before we get into chatting about the work that you do, can you tell me a little bit more about who you are and what the pivot point was that sent you down the road of forensic cyberpsychology?
I am Meagan Copelin. I'm originally from Louisiana. I always have to say that because I have to pay homage to my roots. And I started out in tech, so I'm a techie at heart. I love technology. I love coding. I love everything when it comes to technology. But currently, I'm a behavioral health psychologist, so I'm currently pursuing another doctorate in forensic cyberpsychology, which I'm excited about. So basically, I got into this degree because I wanted to be different. I wanted to set myself apart from other people, and I wanted to understand and examine how psychological harm unfolds within like our institutional systems and our digital environments. And so particularly when it comes to like manipulation, when it comes to power imbalance, vulnerability, etc. And so I just wanted to understand that from a forensic standpoint, coming from a background in tech and psychology. And I'm a Navy veteran. I served in the military, and I am passionate about my veterans. And that's a little bit about me. I'm loving the work that I'm doing and the research that I'm doing in forensic cyberpsychology. It's a new field, of course, and so there's a lot to learn, but I'm excited about where this field is going to take everybody.
You spoke about being a veteran of the military and Navy, and in our original chats, you mentioned facing really significant life challenges, kind of including trauma and kind of stigma.
Yeah.
How did these experiences influence your decision to focus on your research, especially on older adults, and also in becoming a mental health advocate?
I would say that, I planned on having this 25, 30-year career in the military. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And so, my military experience shaped who I am, the things that I do, the way I look at things, the way I look at people, the way I invite people into my environments. And so my military experience really exposed me to environments where psychological strength is valid, is valued, right? And so, but it's stigmatized to be vulnerable. And so, I understand how institutional cultures can discourage disclosure. And I faced some challenges, in the military and being a vet. And so I basically wanted to be an advocate, not only for myself when it comes to mental health, but when it comes to veterans as well. And then growing up, I was always an advocate of elder adults. I was having a conversation with one of my friends on the phone, and I was telling him that I was 6 years old, hanging out with like 7-year-olds, like at their home and watching TV and and cooking and dancing and then having fun. So this work is real personal to me, in a sense, and being a veteran and then exposed to older veterans, I'm seeing that there's more harm than good, especially when it comes to veterans who are facing significant loss in their life, whether it be losing a spouse or losing a child. And they're vulnerable in those states, right? And so I wanted to take my advocacy work, especially being a vet, and kind to expose what's going on with older adults, especially within my research. So this is really about my lived experience and my passion for this work. So I'm all for it. I'm excited about it.
We're going to chat a little bit more in depth in your work in terms of the older adults. We'll dive into that in a second, which I'm very excited about talking about. Just wanted to ask you first, before we get into that, you currently wear quite a lot of hats. So you're a coach, you're a speaker, and an author. How do these different roles inform each other in your current and kind of potentially your future work?
So when I look at these roles, I look at them as them not being separate identities, but they're rooted in my lived experiences. So everything that I do in life, I root them based off of my lived experiences, right? And so, my lived experiences shape the lens through which I approach my work, because it's personal to me, right? And as a behavioral health psychologist, I understand trauma, not event, but as a pattern that like reshapes cognition, emotional regulation, and decision making. And so for me, in pursuing this doctorate in forensic cyberpsychology, I wanted to examine how digital environments interact with those same psychological processes, right? And so coaching keeps me close to the human experience of vulnerability, stress, because when you're coaching, you have people coming to you who are vulnerable, right? They may have lost their job. There may be issues within their workplace where they're trying to align and cope with stress, and so you have to. I look at this coaching as a human experience, right? And then speaking allows me to challenge like oversimplified assumptions in public places. I've been to places to where people are speaking and I left with, what are they talking about? I'm not sure. So I want to explain things people understand in a simple way. So basically, my lived experiences gives me my work weight, right? And so it keeps me attentive to complexities. It keeps me attentive to power dynamics. It keeps me focused on dignity. So I'm excited about just about this research. My doctoral scholarship, and just the future work in this space and in this research as well.
Just want to touch on something there, because
Mm-hmm.
you spoke about people who have been victims and kind
Yeah.
of dealing with stuff. And I guess part of the work that you did,
Mm-hmm.
or the experiences you had when you were in the army and the navy, is that you can really identify this with those people who are
Yeah.
dealing with stuff. And just because they might have a different type of experience, so in the workplace or in
Mm-hmm.
cybercrime, doesn't make your or their experience different from yours. It
Yeah.
sounds as though it's just really similar. When people are victims, they're victims.
Yeah, they're victims, right? And so we can't demonize people, right? We don't
Yeah.
know until we know. There's things that I'm still learning, right, in spaces, right? And so I ask questions. So I think it's important to be an advocate for people to understand and not demonize people for making wrong choices and decisions. Because when you're vulnerable, when you're in environments that are toxic, you're not thinking clearly, right? You're overwhelmed, and so I'm real big on self care. So I tell everybody self care is so important, right? So you cannot be good to anyone else until you're good to yourself. So I make sure that I'm good to myself first, but I still ask questions. Like I said, I'm still learning in a lot of different spaces, and I love to learn, I love to read, and I love to grow. So I think that it's important not to victimize people when they're caught up in situations that they had no clue about, right? I mean, I'm a victim of fraud. So my identity was stolen years ago, 10+ years ago, by someone that I knew, and I didn't even know for like a good 10 years. And yeah, so and I was blamed and taunted, and so I mean it eventually it was cleared up, but yeah, so that's just my experience around this.
So you've got a real lived experience of
Yeah,
knowing what people go through when they are victims of cybercrime.
80% of the things that I do is grounded in lived experiences, so that's why I'm passionate about my work and I take it seriously.
We originally touched base, and because you did a LinkedIn post, you were
Hmm.
talking about in your LinkedIn post, you've kind of finishing chapter 3 or working on chapter 3 of
Yeah.
your PhD. And your post was all about re-victimization of older adults in cybercrime. And
Yeah.
that fascinated me, because you're talking about the re-victimization, and lots of people just talk about the victimization.
Hmm.
And you made some really good points, and I'd love to dive into your knowledge on this. But firstly, what got you into this area? Is it because you spoke about being a victim of cybercrime, but what about the re-victimization?
So what got me into this area is I currently sit on an advisory board for the city of Houston for the Asian population, right? And so the reason why I wanted to sit on the board because I'm passionate about this work and I'm passionate about older adults. We all age. We're all going to get older, right? And so I think it's important to treat people how you want to be treated. And so I wanted to give back in a sense because, like I said earlier, growing up, I always um, was in a company of older adults, and I learned so much from older adults, and I respect older adults because I've learned who I'm. The person that I am today is because of my great grandmother, my aunties, my older cousins, and my neighbors, growing up in New Orleans, Louisiana. And so I just basically really wanted to pay respect to this work. And so I kept noticing a gap that existed within elder fraud research that wasn't addressed, right? And it was re-victimization. And so most literature focused on like prevalence and scam patterns and financial losses. And it was like really descriptive, right? And so basically what I felt was missing was a deeper understanding of what happened psychologically after the first harm. And why some older adults re-engage afterwards. And so the focus of my research is like the post-victimization process and how repeated engagement can develop through psychological conditioning over time. And I wanted to just talk about that work and like I say, pay respect and pay homage and advocate for older adults in this space.
In terms of re-victimization, kind of what does that actually look like? Because if someone's victimized the first time around, you kind of, in some ways, logically think you get that. But what does it mean to be re-victimized?
To be re-victimized is basically, it looks like continued contact and responding after harm has already occurred, maybe the first time, the second time. And then sitting on the board, I noticed that this was occurring repeatedly with the same people over and over and over and over again. And so that's the reason why I wanted to, expand and do this research as well. That might be like, returning to the same offender, however that looks, whether that's that's online dating or, online scams or, responding to similar scam scripts or being drawn into new scams that are familiar, that involve like familiar emotional cues. So I think for me it's important to distinguish this from like simply being targeted again and being being a victim and be re-victimized. It's sad that this is going on, but it's happening. It's happening a lot. I was looking at research and through my research, especially with the Department of Justice and the National Elder Abuse Victim Services, it was said that there was research done on like financial fraud, and the research confirmed that older adults are more likely to be re-victimized by scammers over and over again. So the cycle just repeats itself, and it's largely absent from mainstream. Right, you don't hear about this. So I think there needs to be some type of preventative models, in a sense, to avoid this, but there's not. So that's the reason why I want to do this work, because I want to embed myself into this work and really be an advocate for older adults.
Prior to reading your post on LinkedIn, I'd never considered or heard of the re-victimization of older adults. But what makes older adults particularly vulnerable to being retargeted online? Is it things like trust, or is it about loneliness? Is it about digital confidence, because we talk about digital literacy of older adults? Or do you think it's something else entirely?
I would say a couple of factors, right? I would say the emotional state. So when you think about emotional states, you think about loneliness, you think about shame, right? They were victimized the first time, and so being re-victimized, they're shamed to admit they fell for this the second or third time around. I think grief, and especially when it comes to grieving, when you've lost a loved one, especially a spouse that you've been married to for 25, 30 years, right? And so you don't know anything outside of that particular person. You spent basically your whole life, so it's grief and being vulnerable in a sense to the fact that you're lonely. I think is diminished self-efficiency as well. Which basically can like intensify following like the first incident, and then I realize, especially, doing this work, that offenders are skilled at this. They are very skilled at doing this. And something needs to be done about it because it's happening every single day. And they know how to manipulate the system.
And I suppose if you are kind of an older adult and you've just lost your spouse, and especially if you're in a relationship where you're kind of a team and one person, you kind of divide and conquer the work you get done, all the stuff that needs to get done day to day. And if one partner dies or leaves or isn't there anymore, you then
Yeah.
have to take on these additional life skills. And
Yeah.
it's not just about the grief, it's about
Mhm.
learning new stuff. It's about how on earth do I do this, and feeling lost. And
Yeah.
then you kind of just exploring this digital world where you might not have done banking before. Now there's not even a bank around. So now you got
Yeah.
to do online banking. And how do you do this? So there's
Exactly.
so many things, I guess, that so many variables and so many vulnerabilities that we
Yeah.
don't think about
It's
as a younger generations who've just, this is what we do. We spend time online. But I suppose even in our generation, if you lose a partner who's been doing the finances, how do you do it? What do you
our,
do? You're
you know,
vulnerable, really.
exactly. You're vulnerable. I agree.
So how does the emotional impact of a first scam, because everyone gets scammed, or everyone who is scammed is obviously scammed the first time,
Yeah.
but how does that first scam make someone more susceptible to a
Mhm.
second one?
For me, the first scam, so I say it like this: the first scam often produces what I'll describe as like emotional injury, right? So again, we're talking about the shame, we're talking about the grief, we're talking about the loss of confidence from the first time, maybe the second or third time, right? This is the fourth time. So it becomes like internalized rather than resolved. And so those unresolved consequences can alter like your decision making. It can create, openness to renew contact, right? And so maybe, re-engaging with someone, on an online dating site, or maybe re-engaging with someone that you felt listened, right? And so um, I was having a conversation with someone, and I am not a fan of 90 Day Fiance whatsoever because I think it's just full of scams. So it reminds me of that, just being vulnerable in states, particularly when offenders reappear after reassurance, urgency. They're there for you. Maybe you lost a loved one, and they're there to comfort you through that grief, right? And then that's a familiar body, that's a familiar face. So you're going back to that in a sense of like when it comes to relationships. So that's my take on it.
Do you think we have an inherent trust in people that we're friends with or think that know us? So
Yeah,
if we've developed an online relationship, even if we've never met them in person, we kind of automatically, I'm assuming, have this trust that they won't do it to me again. They've said sorry. It's then surely they are sorry and they won't do it to me again. But I need that comfort. I need that reassurance. Do you think that's the case, or do you think it's just more of a I'm lonely, I need to reach out to someone, and this is better than no one?
I think it plays in both ways, right? Loneliness is it's real. I mean, there's studies about loneliness, right? It's real, and so when you have when you become a victim of a scam, right? Maybe you've confided in someone in your family, and they they're just not there to comfort you or help you, right? And so you go back to the person that's familiar. So I think it's a catch-22, right? But I always say this. I think there's a saying that says like, "Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you," or something in the nature. I'm not 100% sure of the quote, but basically, once you've done, like for me, once you've done something to me, um, I really just disengage because I can't trust you anymore, right? And so I don't want. I'm also looking at the fact that I have to manage my mental health, my emotional state, right? And so I have to take care of myself. But that's not the case for everyone. So I can't speak for everyone, because I may do something different than, the next person or the next person. So when it comes back to this, we can't shame people because we culturally, I grew up different from you and the next person, right? So what I may think is correct, you may not. And so I think it's important not to shame people, but have those conversations and talk and start talking about the advocacy work and how we can assist. Because like I said, we all are going to get older, right? And so we all are going to age. And so it's important to treat people how you want to be treated in a sense. So that's my take on it.
Do you think families sometimes and kind of unintentionally contribute to the problem? So do you think they kind of, for example, overprotect, or do you think they blame, or do you think they kind of ridicule, almost in a way saying, well, you should have known. Why didn't you know? Do you think that families actually contribute to the problem?
Yeah, I think they do, and it's underappreciated, right? I think when you have an older adult that experiences, re-victimization or fraud, even like your well-intended loved ones, maybe that's a daughter or a son, or maybe a sister or brother. They tend to communicate blame, right? They tend to increase shame. you know um, they may say, you should have learned the first time. Why how could you be so you know, naive in a sense, right? And so basically when someone is shamed or they're ridiculed in a situation, it reduces like disclosure to say, okay, I was harmed again. And so it's a shame. So this person, the older person may, keep future contact hidden rather than seeking support and I think this is why like post victimization is important, because that period, that window is very crucial for like intervention in a sense, right? And so this won't happen again, because it could be the first time, it could be it could be the second time, it could be the third time, the fourth time. And so in my work that I do and then the research I've done, I'm seeing, especially in my lived experiences, I'm seeing this done a handful of times, and it needs to stop. So there needs to be more advocacy around this and more conversations around this as well.
How do you think families or loved ones should respond in a way that supports the victim rather than shames them?
So I have a couple of different things. I think they should respond with dignity, right? With calmness, support, you know, um, encourage openness, right? Encourage effective communication. And the goal and primary goal is to like reduce shame, right? And so be supportive, because I always say you never know when you have to experience something. So I always try to put myself in other people's shoes, because I don't know if I may experience something similar in 6 months, in a year, 2 years. And so I try to be as supportive as I can, and making sure that this never happens again. Maybe providing resources, maybe seeking a service that helps victims prevent fraud or re-engage with fraud. But I think it's the overall goal is to basically help to reduce shame, and I think that's the most important thing a family member can do in this situation, especially when it comes to older adults, because technology is growing fast, and a lot of my aunties are 80 years old, and so my aunties don't know what AI is. My aunties don't know how to code. They know email. That's it. And so basically, it's important that I tend to them and make sure that I'm being supportive in that area so that they won't be scammed.
While you were chatting about that and kind of talking about not shaming older people or older adults for being a victim, I was thinking that we wouldn't, in the physical world, if
Mm-hmm.
someone had been mugged, we'd care for them, look after them, protect them. And
Mm-hmm.
if they were mugged a second time, we wouldn't shame them for
Yeah.
being mugged. We would say you are kind of vulnerable. How can we support you? How can we help you not
Mm-hmm.
have this happen again? What things can we put in place? Where it seems to be for an online victimization, there does seem to be a lot more shame of you should have known. How could you not
Yeah.
have known? And it seems like a very different standard if it's a physical victimization versus an online victimization.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Do you think digital literacy campaigns, because we hear that a lot now around digital literacy for young people and for us in general, and also for kind of older adults, do
Mm-hmm.
you think those campaigns are enough? Or do you think we need a deeper cultural shift in how we talk about online risk, and especially for older adults?
I would say, for me, when I look at digital literacy, I think that it's valuable, right? It's valuable in a lot of areas, but it's also inefficient on its own. So when we talk about just digital campaigns or just awareness in general, it's important that we, have educational based prevention programs. Um, and basically we have like trauma informed prevention programs and post scam intervention, because we have programs for the elderly, like, Meals on Wheels, and things of that nature to help the elderly, live a better life. But I don't think there's programs in, educating elders on, how to be aware of scammers, how not to be, victimized the first time or the second time or the third time, right? And so I think that educational based prevention programs are needed in a sense, in this area when it comes to, and then more advocacy, because we tend to talk more about, younger people. But I mean, I'm more than sure there's conversations about this when it comes to fraud and elder, but I don't think there are enough conversations. And so we need to start, advocating not only for ourselves because we're getting older, but advocating for our loved ones as well who are aging or who are aged.
It sounds like it's a dual educational program. It's for those who have older relations, kind of helping them to not go down the shaming route, but also to help them with the to not become victims of cybercrime, but also then for the older adults in terms of not becoming a victim, but also then what happens when, what next? How do you stop the cycle?
Yes, how do you stop the cycle, break the cycle?
In terms of kind of early warning signs of potentially looking or seeing it when someone or if someone may be at risk of being scammed, what are those kind of signs? And not just being scammed, but being scammed again.
I think when we look at warning signs when it comes to anything, when it comes to scams, I think we look at it knowledge based rather than it being on the behavior and emotional. Because when it's knowledge based, people tend to say, "Oh, you should have known better." Like you didn't. How could you do that? I can't believe you did this. You should have known better, right? And so a lot of people don't know. And so some of the signs that I would say, of course, like I say, behavior and emotional, differences. Maybe there's secrecy, around like phone conversations, whether that's messages or there's calls, and strong justification. When people believe one thing in their mind, they justify it, right? So strong justifications for like ongoing contact with this person, the scammer, the fraudster. That's what I call them. And then I would say like visible distress is important, right? So, I think the patterns that are involved in this, really, really reflect like cognitive scripting and emotional reinforcement in a sense, and not simply a lack of like awareness. So we can't continue to say that it's knowledge based. I think it's more in behavior and emotional. So those are the signs that you may see when it comes to people being like re-engaged when it comes to scams.
So it sounds a bit like that system one, system two thinking, in that sometimes it's not logical. It just happens. It's emotional, as you're saying. It's kind of more behavioral. It just happens. But it's interesting that you mentioned the words or the phrase of "you should have known better."
Yeah.
And we just don't always know better when we are in a different way of thinking. It's reactive rather than logical, rational.
Exactly. I and I always go back to my roots, especially growing up in New Orleans. There's are things there are lived and learned experiences that I've learned, that some others may have not. Growing up at an early age, I learned how to be alert and how to make myself visible to my environments, especially when, it's a bad environment. I learned how to immediately exit when things don't seem right. And so that may not be the case for other people, right? So, and that's why I say we can't criticize people and blame them, because what you don't know, right? And so, my experience, like I said, may be different from somebody else. So it's important that we educate people instead of continuing to blame people when it comes to certain things, especially when it surrounds scams.
It's a good point. Is
Yeah.
that we've got very different life experiences, and like you were saying, you knew when to exit from a situation, so you can recognize the signs. Whereas a lot of people who grow up in a more comfortable environment where they kind of they don't have those early warning system going on,
Yeah.
that they won't see it until they're in it.
Yes.
So how can we as professionals or professionals who in this area and working with older adults, so therapists, social workers, community leaders, how can they better support older adults after scam? Because you're doing quite a bit of work in the work you do outside of your PhD. So what advice can you give to professionals?
So my only advice that I would give to professionals is, we need to treat scams as psychological harm, not just like an event, one event. We need to treat it as psychological harm, right? So basically that, effective support, however that looks, that may be like trauma informed care, active shame reduction, attention to cognitive and emotional mechanisms that basically help us to sustain reengagement, or the elderly sustain reengagement over time. So it's basically about the education and the support, really, and not blaming. And then, basically understanding, how and why are you allowing this to happen, and how can we support you so that this won't happen again.
And what practical steps can older adults take to protect themselves without feeling fearful or overwhelmed with any kind of all this technology and the potential of being scammed?
I would say the goal is, to me, is I'm an empowered person, right? So I would say the goal is being empowered, not, basing everything off of fear. So having autonomy around this situation, right? That means, like, basically establishing like maybe verification routines for like any financial request, maybe adding, a, a loved one on an account, right? So that way, that two signatures are required before any information is given. I mean, but in the case, sometimes that doesn't happen because scammers, they're sophisticated, right? So they know how to scam really, really good. And I was like learning how to slow down, and then, basically to understand the situation, right? Just slowing down and thinking and saying, okay, this happened the first time. What are the key signs? What are the red flags? What am I doing that is going to allow me to be re-victimized again? So just slowing down, because urgency is a manipulation tool, and having a trusted person to consult before making a decision is important. So, like I said before, the goal is just basically empowerment and not fear in the situation. Be empowered, stand your ground, and say to yourself, this is not going to happen to me again. I'm never going to become a victim of this again.
That's a good point. And it seems that a lot of the scams are about urgency
Mm-hmm.
and getting people to do something now, and it's kind of rushing you into these decisions when actually you don't have time to think it through. So
Mm-hmm.
it's when I suspect that if someone is starting to rush you, then
Mm-hmm.
that should raise your alarm bells and go, oh, this doesn't feel, it feels
Yeah.
like I'm panicking. I'm having to make quick decisions. Maybe this is when I phone a friend and call
Mm-hmm.
someone to find out what's going on or
Yes.
help me with it.
What show was that? Phone a friend. I forgot what it was, but yeah, I love it. Phone a friend.
It's
Phone a
Who Wants to
member.
Be a Millionaire?
Yeah, phone a friend. Yeah, 5 lives. You have options.
Yeah.
So I agree.
If someone who's listening thinks a parent or grandparent may be at risk, or has been victimized before, what's the best way to start the conversation with their loved one about how to go about, or giving them hints and tips or helping them through the situation?
I would say that I think it's important not to confront, right? So not confront, because when you confront a situation, people become defensive, right? And so approach every situation with care, because you're dealing with a loved one that has been traumatized by this experience, right? And so you don't know how many emotions they have going on in their head. So I think it's important not to confront but care. I would say something like, like, I want to make sure you're safe, like, show me what you're doing, show me your app, like, how can we look at this together, how can I support you in this time? That to me is really important, because and listen. I always tell people it's important to listen without responding, because if you listen, people are going to tell you everything that you need to know, right? And so I think it's important that, in situations like this, we make the person feel like, or our elder adult feel like, they're not being shamed, and we're empowering them to disclose this information so that this most likely won't happen, not only to them or to the next person as well. Maybe their friends that they're having conversations with who will also be being re-victimized in situations, because, you know, people talk, right? And they may have similar experiences. So it may be, a group of friends that's being targeted and we have no idea. And so just having that, conversations and being open to help and maybe, preventing, 5, 6, 7 others from, being targeted as well. I think that's important.
It's a really good point. It is about listening and giving space to listen to someone, because it's rather than going in with, why do you do this? You should know better. What's wrong with you? Or how could you let this happen to you? It's just kind of giving them that space. And because if you're involved in therapy or mentoring, it's one of the key tools you use is to stop talking.
Yeah.
and give them the silence so they can actually open up and feel heard and feel like they are they're important and valued rather than told off.
Yes, I agree.
With AI, and you spoke earlier about AI being something that bad actors use, and they use it to kind of personalize scams a lot more. So with these increasingly personalized scams, do you expect re-victimizing rates to rise going forward?
Yeah, I think with all scams, as scams become, emotionally convincing, because we currently, a lot of us are in an emotional state, right? We're in a vulnerable state, especially what's going on in the world, in the United States. I would say, AI has the potential to just like amplify, repetition. I would also say it has the ability to amplify emotional cues, and then like perceive intimacy when it comes to a relationship, right? And so, I was looking at some stats online, and I think it was like, according to like, I think it was the FBI site, but basically they were saying that between like 2021 to 2023 or 24, the losses to investment scams among like older adults increased by 400%. So basically, as scams became more personalized, like AI, the curve is only going to steepen, especially when you have people that's uploading their financial information into AI, asking questions. They're uploading personal documents into AI, asking questions about, maybe legal advice, or, advice on, medical, issues and things of that nature. So I would say that, it's going to steepen, right? If we don't take a hold of this.
So in all of this, what does this whole issue reveal about how we as a society value or kind of overlook older adults in the digital world?
I want to speak about my aunts again because, like I said, my aunties are older adults. They're in their 80s, right? And so, I think, especially, dealing with my aunties, I think they're excluded. I mean, I grew up being a techie, and so my auntie was a nurse, and so, a lot of our elders, especially our elders in their like, 80s and 90s, they're being excluded from like mainstream conversations about like cyber risk, right? They're not on these calls about like, how to protect yourself from like, cyber scammers and things of that nature. And so, I think, when we frame it that way, I'm excited about this work because, my work tries to reframe that, that harm here is pattern and is structurally produced, right? And it requires better design interventions and genuine accountability. So I would say that, for me, it's just about being disengaged from what's going on in the world, especially when it comes to technology. If you don't have a technology background or you don't have someone in your family to teach you these things, right? And so, my auntie, even in her 50s and 60s, she was asking me how to use Word. So she didn't know how to use Word. So I had to set up her like computer. I had to like help her use like PowerPoint and, Microsoft Office and things of that nature, and like how to like look on the back of her router and change her internet password. And so, like I said, they're being excluded from these conversations. I mean, so I think we need to start. I'm not saying that we just start having Zoom calls with our older adults, but we need to start having, prevention mechanisms in place. Maybe, visiting elder institutions to, basically educate our elders on fraud, or basically, having, some type of seminars or whatever the case may be, But yeah, I would say that's what I would say. That's my advice and opinion on that space.
Are there any other insights that you've gained so far from your research that we haven't yet covered in our conversation?
The models, the frameworks. There's no frameworks, right? So I'm building my own framework. I'm still working on it. So, as I approach my research further, I'm working on my framework, but I have, started working on like models and explaining why prior victimization doesn't reliably lead to disengagement, right? And that's the puzzle I'm trying to put together. My research reframes elder fraud not as a singular criminal event, but as a self reinforcing psychosocial process to me. So, and then of course it's based on like my lived experiences. And so, but once you see it that way, I feel like both the problem and the solutions look very different in this space. So I'm working on preventative measures to put that puzzle together. So that I can, lead my research not only as a better researcher, but an informed individual so that I can help the Asian community as well.
We're going to have to chat about that again on this podcast once you put that together, because I think that's just going to be such valuable insights for anyone who's wanting to help their parents or grandparents.
Yes, exactly.
We spoke during our initial chat about the difference between the current media focus on young people and social media, because there's a lot going on in kind of Western cultures around young people on the internet and young people with smartphones and young people with social media. But there seems a distinct lack of focus on older adults and digital technology. It's kind of like there's nothing going on from what I've seen around older adults. How do you think the vulnerability of the younger generations differs from the vulnerability of the older generations?
I would say for me, when I look at the vulnerabilities surrounding this, I think the vulnerabilities are different in structure and context. So when you talk about your older adults, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how old a millennial is, because I don't know. I mean, Gen X, Gen Z, I have no idea. I'm like, how old are you? Like, what year were you born? I don't know what this is, but basically, when we talk about young people, the conversation often centers around like identity formation, peer pressure, social comparison. And then, when we talk about older adults, the vulnerability tends to, intersect with like life transitions. Maybe, oh, as a woman, you're going through menopause. You're, or whatever the case may be, and or it may be like retirement, or loss of a partner, or social isolation, health changes, shifting roles in a family system, right? So we talk about the mechanisms, excuse me, they're different, right? Even though the technology is the same, the vulnerabilities are different in structure, in context when it comes to these conversations around older adults versus young people.
So we can't really layer how we see younger generations and those vulnerabilities onto older generations and their vulnerabilities.
Exactly.
So what do you think are the biggest opportunities you see right now for shifting how society views mental wellness, especially among older adults?
I think a lot of the times we forget about our elderly, right? We do. We forget to check on them. We forget to just spend time with them. We in a lot of areas, right? So we tend to view like our older adults through like a deficit lens, I would say. So and that when it comes to things like this, the narrative limits like intervention when it comes to like scams. So basically, we need to start normalizing conversations about digital harm without, like I said, attaching shame when it comes to our elder adults, right? And so the biggest opportunity in this space right now is like reframing mental wellness in like aging populations as a matter of dignity, autonomy, and then like support rather than like decline. Oh, you're declining. Maybe we tend to say if an elder adult forgets something, or they're going through dementia. That may not be the case. We forget. I forget sometimes to do things, right? We're human, right? So not basing it on that. So we talk about mental wellness, and it's being talked about a lot, right? but we need to also include like mental wellness in older adults, in these spaces, like digital wellness, informing them on fraud prevention. We need to also start having like healthcare conversations with them, because when you're re-victimized or you're victimized in situations like that, that can cause stress. So that's high blood pressure, right? That's issues with your gut, your stomach, and things of that nature. And so we just need to shift to like reactive models, from reactive models to proactive models in a sense. So not use it as like a crisis response, but like building systems that reduce this harm in a sense.
That's a really good point, because when we go through that element of stress, there's a lot of physical implications. It's not just mental implications. And when someone's getting older, they don't recover as quickly as someone who's younger. So it could have a lot of physical harms.
Mm-hmm.
So outside of your PhD in forensic cyberpsychology, what are you currently working on that you're kind of really particularly excited about?
Oh, I'm working on a lot of stuff, right? I'm building a company, so that's important. I'm working on frameworks within that company. And so I'm excited. I'm just excited about my research and where this is going to take me. Building frameworks for me is very important. And so I was telling someone, how can I include myself in this space? Because I felt like, when I first decided I wanted to go back to school to get a doctorate, I was like, am I crazy? Like, why am I doing this? But then I realized that, this is very important to me. This is more advocacy work than anything, right? So the things that I do are important in it. And I do things with purpose and I do things with passion. And so I want to, increase my speaking engagements and talk about this topic. I want to, work on like governance, frameworks and be a part of those discussions, and I feel like, as systems, like especially when we talk about AI and all these different intelligence systems, as they increase and shape the decisions and environments that we live in, I think that advocacy, mental wellness, bias, safety needs to be embedded into these systems and not treated as an afterthought. So those are some of the things that I'm working on to build. And I think that that should be important. That should be hindsight for everybody, especially when it comes to our older adults, and just in general for people in general to prevent harm overall. Because scammers are real, and I get emails from scammers every single day, and I know what to look for, but they are real. But if you don't know better, you don't do better.
A really good point. Megan, what is the most important question I haven't asked you yet?
I would say, I thought about this question. And I would say this: what assumptions? So for me, what assumptions are we making about vulnerability, right? Because vulnerability may look differently for a lot of different people. So me, I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? Too often, us as a society, we assume, that vulnerability is about intelligence, is about age, is about awareness. The older you get, the more you should know. The spaces that you work in, you're expert, you should be aware of your, what's going on. It's about, oh, you're smart, you graduated with a 4.0, and you should know these things. But vulnerability is like really dynamic, and it's shaped by like life transitions, right? So like I said again, however that looks, right? It's shaped by emotional stress, mental health, social context, especially I'm not a fan of TikTok because of that. And then, the systems that we're designing today, not all systems are there to keep people safe, right? And so for me, it's like how do we design systems that support people and reduce harm so that we prevent psychological harm in the first place, so this won't happen again. So that's my take on it. So like I said, we make these assumptions, and we should not make this assumption, because vulnerability looks different for everybody. It may look different for you than me than my neighbor than the next person. Yeah.
That's a good point, because I know I do that on a number of occasions. I look at it from my perspective, and this is
Yeah.
my perspective of what it means to be vulnerable, and I don't kind of look at it from someone else's perspective, what they've gone through in their history and their lived experiences.
Yeah, I agree.
So where do you see the future going in the realm of forensic cyberpsychology?
I'm so excited about, cyber psychology in general, and I always have to tell people, because when I tell people I'm going back to school to get my PhD in forensic cybercology, they think it's forensic psychology, and it's not. It's totally different, right? It's a relatively, young field in a lot of different ways, right? We're still establishing like the foundations within this in this place. So I think that means that, as we become, as we graduate and as we become, cyber psychologists, we need to have a seat at the table, right? Like in governance, in technology, in development, in policy, in conversations around behavioral and mental health, trauma, scams, things of that nature. We need to have conversations. When you talk about like, bridging behavioral health with systems design, that means engaging like, serious ethical AI. So, when it comes to cyber psychology, it's about like the digital risk modeling and things to that nature, the psychological safeguards. So just having these seats at the table, because I think a lot of people don't know what cyber psychology is now, and it's hard to explain to someone who is not interested in understanding what it is. So, I think the future is bright for this space, and I'm excited about where this is going to take everybody, especially who's working in the space now. Because look, our world, we're coming for you, and we're on a mission. Yeah, so I'm excited, and I look forward to, like I said, working in this space with people like you, and just educating people on such a remarkable space and field that's up and coming, and it's going to just be dynamic in the next couple of years or so.
And we need more people in forensic cyber psychology, because it is, and my understanding of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that forensic cyber psychology is different from cyber psychology of cybersecurity, because forensic in my head is that you're kind of going after the perpetrator, the bad actor. You're trying to understand their psychology and how they then scam or what's going on. So whereas a cybersecurity cyber psychologist is the victim.
You're correct.
So, and we really do need to know what's going on with bad actors and how they operate, so we can then educate potential victims or people who have been victims on what could be going on and why they're victims. Or there's you need a both and, not just a victim focus. You need a perpetrator focus too.
Yes, and every day somebody victimized, however that looks, right? So, every day, I'm a TV. Well, I would say I'm a crime show junkie. So I love like CSI and FBI and all these different. I know they're fictional, but I still like them. And then the real crime TV shows. But every single day somebody's victimized, right? So we just need to start advocating in those spaces.
So Meagan, do you have any particular favorite cyber psychology related books that you normally recommend others to read?
So The Cyber Effect by Meagan. She's the mother of forensic cyber psychology. I know you're familiar with her. I would say an introduction. So in order to understand cyber psychology, you need to be introduced to cyber psychology, right? So I would say an introduction to cyber psychology. Palmer and Connolly wrote that book. I think you can find these books on Amazon. There's also like strategic uses of social technology, because I think it's useful in a sense when you read that book. It's useful understanding how social forces and digital systems interact, especially when you're talking about like psychology and like building these like platforms in this space. So those are the 3 books that I recommend.
Thank you. Those are brilliant. Meagan, thank you so much for joining me on Confessions of a Cyber Psychologist. It was so fabulous to catch up with you, and I really look forward to chatting again in the future, especially when you've designed your platform and have all that kind of meted out. It'll be lovely to chat to you about that going forward.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you for having me. I'm excited. Thank you.